Welcome to Goyette Ruano Thompson podcast series. Today, I am interviewing my good friend, Mr. Mark Peacock. Mark, thanks so much for joining us.
Of course.
Today. Yeah. So a little bit about Mark. Mark is a trial lawyer, personal injury expert. Mark's been a lawyer for over 30 years now, I believe. He and I have been at this business about the same time. Mark and I have worked together extensively on cases over the years. I mean, we're business partners on a number of cases that we're doing jointly together. And we have a super interesting case that we've worked on together that I want to talk about today. I want to ask Mark about. Very compelling, very interesting case that our client is the Paredes family. And so, Mark, first of all, thanks for joining.
Of course, yeah.
Appreciate it. Mark made the trip up from Orange County today
absolutely.
And to the Our World headquarters here. So thanks very much.
Of course.
Mark, to start with, obviously we worked on the Paredes case now for coming up on a couple years, I guess.
That's right.
Let's start this way. The Paredes case led to the tragic death of two City of El Monte police officers. Our client being Michael Paredes. And why don't you tell us about the police call and what led up to this incident?
Sure. Initially, it was a domestic violence call that came into the City of El Monte dispatcher. There was some indication that the suspect, had stabbed somebody. So, that was the call that came in. Mm-hmm. So that's blasted out, and Officer Santana and now Sergeant Paredes responded to that call. The tragedy, and we'll get into this, I think, a little bit more. The tragedy is that they did not have all the information that they probably should have had, that they absolutely should have had, actually. If they had all the information that they had, many different scenarios probably would have erupted. Number one, they would have responded differently. They probably wouldn't have gone there alone. They probably called in SWAT or somebody like that.
What information did they have?
That's all they had was possible stabbing and domestic violence. That's it.
At what location?
At a dirtbag motel, not a hotel, not an inn, a motel. And by the way, it's interesting when you go to these. We'll get into this a little bit later, but it's really, really tragic because the hotel that the shooting took place at is widely known and has a huge, long history of crime, prostitution, drugs. You have guys there that literally hole up into they rent a room and they're selling drugs out of rooms and things like that. Police officers have told me in that area, not only just police officers, the deputy sheriffs, if they need to hit their mark in terms of like an arrest or responding to a crime.
You mean stats?
Stats, exactly. They go, okay, we'll just go to the Siesta Inn.
And was that the name of the hotel, the
yes,
Siesta
Inn of all things, Siesta Inn.
Siesta Inn.
Yeah, exactly. It ain't no siesta. But if you ever go there, it's one of those places you absolutely would not stop at. You wouldn't bring your family there. You wouldn't do anything like that. You go, is there something going on?
Not a romantic getaway with your wife or girlfriend?
Yeah, no, not at all. Not at all.
Siesta Inn.
Not even a mistress. Not even that, man. It's absolutely horrible. So they show up. The officers show up, and they don't really know what they're getting into, other than they have a DV or domestic violence call.
Okay.
With a possible stabbing. Okay, but they don't have anything else other than that. So they are able to extract the woman, but they had no idea who Mr. Flores was or what his history was at all. So suddenly, shit hits the fan, if you will, and the whole thing explodes. And both officers are unfortunately killed in an entirely preventable environment, by the way, entirely preventable.
So when you say the whole thing exploded, did a gunfight erupt or what happened?
The girlfriend was able to get out of the room. The perpetrator, Mr. Flores, Justin Flores, he attacked one of the officers and gunfire just erupted. And our client, Mike Paredes, he was shot. He was first shot, and when he went down, the gunfire just exploded.
So the suspect, Mr. Flores, was armed.
Yes.
With the domestic call involved a knife.
That's right.
So the call that came out that Sergeant Paredes and Officer Santana responded to, Did they have any information about a gun being present?
No, no. They said possible stabbing. That's it.
That would have been good information to have.
Yes. And on that note, too, by the way, the background of Mr. Flores, I think, is really, really.
I was going to ask you about that.
Yeah, it's germane to everything because he had a long history of felony convictions, drug possessions, firearm in violation of probations. He had done time not only in local jails but in the prison, the big house, and he was on probation at the time of the murder. And when he was, and why that's important is because this is where we get into the discussion of how the system failed and why did it fail. And it failed because a lot of things. Number one, if the DA, the probation department, if they had been doing what they were supposed to be doing, if they followed protocol, they followed the law actually, if they actually followed it, Mr. Flores would have been in prison. He would not have been in that motel. It's unfortunate. We'll get into those things a little bit more, but it's unfortunate that that kind of information, the suspect's background, that he had been in violation of probation, that he had failed to return phone calls with his probation officer, that his mother, by the way, 2 weeks before the shooting, or a week or something like that before the shooting, actually called Flores' mother, the suspect.
Justin Flores' mother?
Justin Flores' mother called his probation officer and warned him, said, hey, my son is taking drugs again, and he's violent again. He's off the chain. You guys got to do something. And guess what they do?
What did they do?
Nada.
They did nothing.
They didn't do anything at all. They didn't do anything, nothing at all. So
Okay, so Mr. Flores is a hardened criminal.
yes,
Been in and out of the system, in and out of the joint.
yes,
Violent history.
violent, yes,
And we'll talk more about what he was even doing on the streets to begin with, because that's really the cornerstone issue in our case that we brought. But backing up to the day of the incident, the officers weren't told any of that information.
no, not at all.
Who called in the domestic violence call? Was it the hotel, Siesta Inn people? Was it the girlfriend?
The girlfriend,
She was able to call.
she was able to call in. Mr. Flores apparently was beginning to unravel and becoming more and more dangerous to her. By the way, she certainly is not a sympathetic character. And after the shooting and everything, she was very, very emotional about it and very thankful that they came and saved her. She felt the officers saved her life.
Well, hell yeah.
Yeah,
That's exactly
and
what they did.
It's exactly, and it would have been really helpful to both Officer Paredes and Officer Santana if they knew all this background on this guy and that he had been in violation of probation. Why these things aren't available to officers like that, especially now in 2024. This happened in 2022, but why these things aren't available to these officers like that is beyond me. Yeah, I don't understand that. We have AI for everything now. Why don't we have AI? Why can't you connect everything organically inside of a police department, probation, DA's office, all kinds of things like that? So when an officer is responding to a call, especially a violent call, right, where there could be somebody could be dead, somebody be getting killed or something like that from a known felon.
Yeah.
They know, why isn't this happening? And that wasn't in place at all.
You think there'd be a consolidated database somewhere where they could easily tap into all the background information regarding, who they're dealing with.
Exactly.
If I'm understanding this correctly, then they're just thinking this is a garden variety, knife-related domestic violence call.
Yes.
They don't know anything about this suspect, Mr. Flores,
Nothing.
but they know they're going to the Siesta Inn, which is a rat hole.
Right. Yeah, I was going to say what they know, and neither you and I were there, obviously,
Yeah.
but what we can assume that they knew were just what was told to them by the dispatchers, right? And that, hey, you got a DV, a domestic violence call with possible stabbing, and that's it. Okay, so responding to the Siesta Inn, by the way, would be I would assume that would have been a normal call.
Probably every shift.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't think it's necessarily anything out of the norm. So that's how I have seen it, and the officers that I've talked with that both knew both Paredes and Santana. They said the same thing. Their take on that is, by the way, that Siesta Inn. It's really kind of interesting. The Siesta Inn is situated right between two other inns. So there's 3 inns. So when you drive by it, it's like I don't know what you call it, tenderloin or something like that. It's horrible. You can tell it's criminal alley right there.
Skid Row.
Skid Row, exactly. So when they're responding to it, you can imagine. Sergeant Paredes has been on the force for a while, so he probably, I don't know how many times he had responded to that place. I saw confidentially a call sheet on that inn, and it was daily calls, if not hourly calls, that thing. Not 9 to 5, but 9 to 9, 24 hours a day. That's the kind of place that they were responding to.
That's amazing. Well, I might have told you that my friend, Tom Wu, who's a lawyer in Los Angeles County, he's a former LA County Sheriff's deputy. Tom and I worked on a case together last year and the year before. But Tom told me about the Siesta Inn, that when he was a patrol deputy in LA County, they had stats they had to hit every month. Yeah. And Tom said they would do, like, towards the end of the month, if they were a little light on arrests, citations, probationer contacts, parolee contacts, they would do a drive-by of the Siesta Inn.
Yes.
And it says it was an automatic stat generator. They would make arrests every time.
Yeah, and I mean, it's easy to grin right now at that and go, because it's ironic, but it's also extremely sad and pathetic that something's not done about that. But yeah, I mean, they think about that for the officers. They've dumbed down the normalcy of the environment. Yeah. So instead of going in there thinking it's going to be, one thing, they're used to it. So they show up, thinking it's just going to be something, not out of the norm, just
breaking
something.
up a fight between tweakers or something.
Exactly, something like that. And suddenly, bam, 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 it's everything's gone to hell. And you have 2 dead officers, just like that, bam.
Were they both, Sergeant Paredes and Officer Santana, were they both shot?
They're both shot, yes. It's very, very sad. Sergeant Paredes was shot first, and he sustained a head wound, and it was the initial shot. That was it. There were many more shots than just that, but Sergeant Santana, or Officer Santana, was wrestling with Flores at the time, and it was horrible. It was absolutely horrible. So those guys clearly did the best that they could in that moment, and it was a surprise environment for those guys. Wow. And in the meantime, like I was saying earlier, the girlfriend runs out and is saved. So guess what? Sergeant Paredes and Officer Santana are heroes. They did what they were supposed to do. And
they're left in there to fight this shithead, Mr. Flores.
Yeah, exactly. And then boom, it's absolutely tragic. It's really tragic. And
of course, I mean, there's 100, and we're going to get into it here, but Mr. Flores is a convicted felon on probation or parole, whatever his status was. Of course, legally couldn't possess a firearm.
Yeah.
But I guess that's small potatoes for it.
Yeah, he was on probation because he had previously possessed a firearm.
Oh, there we go.
The year before. So he's put on probation. He cut a deal so he's put back on probation, actually. So he's on probation. He's supposed to stay away from everything bad, and he continues to do whatever he wants. You know why? Because it's unchecked. Yeah. He's supposed to check in. Part of his probation was that he's supposed to check in monthly with his probation officer. Doesn't do that. If you miss that 2 months in a row, guess what? The probation officer is supposed to. It's a report, a desertion report. That's not filed. Nobody submits anything like that. Nobody's tracking any of this stuff at all. So you have a convicted guy, and he's violating probation left and right.
And there's no consequence.
No consequence. And that's the part right there, no consequence, that is undigestible. That part should piss anybody with any sense of morality off, because that part was preventable. That part right there was preventable. Nothing against the individual probation officers. It's not that. It's the system. The system was being modified. These officers were being pulled off. They're guys like Flores, and they were sent over to juvie. There's all kinds of shifting going on. I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about. The DA there, Gascon, when he came in, we're going to get into this. When he came in, he yanked the 3 strikes. He said, "We're not going to prosecute the 3 strikes." Right?
Right.
Not only did he say, "Hey, we're not going to prosecute the 3 strikes," from here forward, any charges that are being prosecuted right now, before Gascon came in, we're going to yank them, and any previous 3 strikes, we're going to yank those as well. So to me, and to a lot of people, the judges and everybody who's much brighter than I, he is walking in, and that's not just necessarily a policy. And you see that word thrown around a lot. I don't think that's a policy. I think what he's doing is implementing his own law. And
Well, I was going to say, how the hell does he do this? Who made him emperor?
Exactly. So when he's doing that, guess what he's doing? There's three sections of the government, right? There's the judiciary, the legislative, and the executive branch. He's in the executive branch. He took an oath, by the way, right? You and I did when we got sworn in. He taken up to do what? Uphold the law. Uphold the law. The oath was not, hey, Paul, hey, Mark, make the law. That's not what it was.
We would have had an entirely different career if that's been the case.
I have a ponytail, I think, by now.
Make the law up as you go.
Exactly. But that's actually exactly what he was doing. He shouldn't be able to do that. And so when he did that,
What's outrageous?
To me, it's beyond outrageous because it's now you have two people who are dead. And these two people who are dead, by the way, are not just people off the sidewalk, if you will. These are officers who also took an oath to uphold the law. That was their job, to uphold the law. And you know as well as I do, these guys, it's black and white. They give their life, their blood, their family, everything, their entire environment, not just family, friends. They live it. And it gives them a structure, and the structure is basically good versus evil, good, and they're on the good side. And guess what? When they turn around, they look over their shoulder, and they realize there's nobody there. Nobody's there protecting them. They feel abandoned, and that's exactly what happened here. When Gascon pulled the 3 strikes, he was effectively saying, no, I'm in now the legislative part of the government. You're not allowed to do that. You are the executor, like the executive branch. You're the president. You're the DA.
No, I gotcha.
That's it. And when he's stepping over like that, that's why he got sued by all of his DDA.
I want to ask you about that case, that deputy DA case. A couple things I wanted to clean up, though. Had Officer Santana and Sergeant Paredes known more information, say they would have known that the suspect had a gun, or say they would have really known, okay, the suspect is Justin Flores, gang member, proficient criminal.
Yeah.
As opposed to the two of them handling it, they probably would have done something differently, right?
Yes. So what they would have done, that I've been told, remember, this is better than anybody really. These guys go through training constantly.
Yeah.
Constantly training for different environments, constantly anticipating X, Y, and Z, constantly doing that, right? So they're under all kinds of training. So if they're going into an environment where they know somebody like Flores, some piece of crap like that is behind the door, and he's got a hostage. It's a hostage environment.
Yeah, 100%.
So what do? You create a perimeter, you call in SWAT, you call in reinforcements, and boom, you light it up like that. That's what they typically would do. They do some version of that. I'm not a police officer. However, representing these guys over 32 years, which is, I can't believe that's been that long, but
Time goes by.
it does.
You don't look that old, by the way.
Neither do you. But that's what they would have done. That's what they've told me that they would have done. They would have approached the environment like that. And they've learned, in the old days, in the 60s and 50s, they would have gone right through the door with the guns a-blazing. But times have progressed, so now officers take not a defensive posture, but they are smarter about what they do. They call reinforcements, boom, 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 and then they hopefully are able to extract not only Flores but the victim as well. They don't do that though.
Was Mr. Flores, was he killed in this incident too?
Yes, he was. Yeah, I'm still searching for some sympathy from anybody on that.
Oh, you're not going to get it from me.
Yeah, that's, yeah. I mean, that's, and it wasn't a suicide, thing, environment like that. It wasn't anything like that. This guy's just, we know he's doing crystal meth. We know that he had manufactured it before. We know he's, probation violator. We know all these things. So his world, clearly, if you saw his file, his world is clearly spiraling out. And he's not going up. He's going down. And boom, that's what they walked into. They had no idea.
So it was really, for Flores, it was only a matter of how many people he took with him.
Yes. And by the way, not to hop forward, by the way, that's why you have 3 strikes.
Well, that's a good segue, because that's what I want to ask you about, and I want to get to LA County case, the Deputy DA Association against DA Gascon. But tell me, what did the DA Gascon do as it relates to 3 strikes? What exactly was the change or the rule he laid down within his agency?
His first day, if I got it right, if it's not his first day, it's his second day. This first day, he issues directives, okay? And one of the very first ones he issues is, we are no longer going to be prosecuting under the 3 strikes. It was Penal Code 667. We're no longer going to do that. And like I said earlier, not only are we not going to do it on a move forward basis, but we're not going to do it on a backwards basis either.
So for our listeners and viewers that may not remember, what exactly did the 3 strikes law do?
It allowed, by the way, that's a good question, because first of all, I'm not a 3 strikes expert or anything like that, but keep something, I would encourage people to keep something in mind. The 3 strikes did not just come overnight. So what was 3 strikes really all about? It was about, hey, how do you address recidivism? How do you address these guys who get out of prison and just go down around the corner, commit another crime, and they go back into prison? So how do you address that? There is, unfortunately, a budgetary, a monetary level to everything in America.
Of course.
And here, to me, my understanding of 3 strikes is like, okay, it's a way to incentivize or rehab some of these, give these people, these inmates, these convicts, these felons, an opportunity to get things right. Also, to keep them out and incentivize them to keep them out, number one. And number two, it also allows people or the government to incarcerate them if that's necessary. It's a way to say, hey man, if you do this 3 times, on your 3rd time, that's what we call it 3 strikes. On your 3rd time, it's an enhancement, and you're going to go to the big house forever. That was that was sort of the gist behind it all. So we're going to give you 1 warning, 2 warnings. You commit your crime, you do another one. There's your first warning, you get a second warning. I'm telling you, if you do it a 3rd time, you're going to be sent away for the big house. Now, I'm oversimplifying it, but that's basically what it is.
And that life sentence on the 3rd strike would have been up to the judge, the sentencing judge.
Yes.
Okay, so let me make sure I understand. What was Gascon's directive on day 1 or day 2 in office?
To yank all that. Not even yank it all. And the reason why is he wanted these people to be out of the jails. He didn't want these people to be in the prisons. I would not be surprised if Gascon and somebody else were at the French Laundry eating dinner, talking about how do we lower the cost of incarceration, because that's basically
just curious. Who might you be referring to that he was having dinner with at the French Laundry? We're not
obviously knew so. But
we are not going to go down that political rabbit hole.
No.
Oh, trust me, I want to, but we're not going to today.
Exactly. But there's probably some truth in all that. Because Newsom, if you look at the budget on just the prison system alone, it's billions of dollars. I don't know if it's hit 20 billion yet or not, but it's above $10 billion a year. And guess what? The governor is charged with, hey, how do you reduce the budget? He's constantly trying to do that, shifting money here and there. The same is true with the DA. When he comes in, he knows he's got a budget. That's what he is. By the way, if you read interviews of Gascon, you know how he describes himself? Not as a DA, not as a trial lawyer. He says, I'm a manager. So what does that tell you? That implies to me very clearly what he's managing is a budget.
Well, okay, so he lays down a directive on day 1 in office that no strikes will be prosecuted?
No strikes will be prosecuted. None.
Okay, now, it's kind of blowing my mind right now. Was that within his discretion to do that?
Well, that's what's being litigated right now. That's what's up before the Supreme Court right now. If you ask me, no. Before when we're talking about the government, where I was doing a little seminar on the government, you have the judiciary, the executive branch, and the legislative branch. The legislative branch is supposed to do that. They are the ones who spent years debating, compromising, listening to lobbyists, special interest groups, and they came up with this 3 strike system. That's what they did. That's what they're supposed to do. They came up with a law, and they gave it to the DAs around California and said, you guys have to do this. And get what Gascon did, he's like, no, I'm not going to do that. In fact, I'm going to ignore that.
And if I remember correctly, I mean, the elected district attorney in any county is the highest ranking law enforcement official in that county, right?
Yeah.
There's
There's a few jokes there, but I'll leave it alone.
Their sworn duty is to enforce the law, or did I get that wrong?
No, you're absolutely spot on. You're spot on. That's when he raises his hand and he puts his hand on the Bible. That's what he's given an oath to. That's exactly what he's supposed to do. That's his job. His job is not to make law, but Gascon was trying to make law, and he's basically implementing his own stuff, his own ethics, his own morale, whatever it is that's going on in his head. That's what he was doing. That's not the way to do it, though. You know whose job it is to change that? The legislative.
Yeah, of course.
But guess what? Those guys, they won't do it. They don't do anything. They get their pensions, they get their salaries, and they go home. That's it.
We're not going to go down that political rabbit hole either, although I'd love to do that as well. So let's go back to Justin Flores. Did he have any strikes?
He did. He cut a deal on a strike. I don't know which number it was. In 2021, he cut a deal on a strike, and that's why he was put on probation.
Okay, so had he been prosecuted, had that strike been implemented, then, if I'm understanding this correctly,
he would have been incarcerated.
He would have been in prison.
Yes, prison, not jail, prison.
He would have been in the joint.
Yeah.
So he would not have been at the Siesta Inn.
Yes.
Committing acts of domestic violence and police murder.
You are correct. You are absolutely correct.
So that's the issue.
Yeah, and the backdrop of that a little bit is this happens in 2021. His violation where he cuts a deal and is put on probation, and COVID's going on. So there's some dynamic like that. But if you stick your head into that environment like we did during discovery and all this stuff, you find out that guess what? Gascon is reshuffling everybody. He's taking this DA and that DA and putting him over there. He's taking this probation officer off that, putting him over there. He's doing all that kind of stuff.
Well, I understand his directive. I'm trying to come up with the right tyrant word for him, but his directive was not popular among his deputy DAs.
Not at all.
In LA County. And did they not file suit against him?
They did. It was not popular for a variety of reasons, but primarily the gist is two things. Number one, it renders them, to some degree, impotent on what they're supposed to do. Because they, too, by the way, took an oath in front of the state bar when they were sworn in to uphold the law. So now they're being told, no, don't uphold the law. In fact, I got a new law for you. Here it is. So they're frustrated. And think of, it's not just hundreds or 5 or 10. It's thousands, if not tens of thousands of environments of criminal cases that all of these good-hearted, hard-working DAs, deputy DAs, have been working on doing what? Keeping criminals off the street, doing what they're supposed to do, uphold the law. Suddenly, their head dude comes in, and he's managing them, and he implements his own law. He says, no, you can't do it anymore. Now we're going to yank it from you. In fact, one of his officers, I should tell you this, one of his DDAs was so frustrated with them, and she complained back at him. So guess what? She's moved over from position A to position B. And guess what?
Good old retaliation.
That's exactly what she got. A verdict last year for, I think, $1.5 million against him.
Oh, good for her.
Yes, because of it's a retaliatory move. And he's got other suits like that hanging out as well.
The DAs as a whole, they have an association, employee organization.
That's what that is.
And they brought a case called the Association of Deputy District Attorneys of Los Angeles County versus Gascon.
Yes.
And you're familiar with that case.
Yes, very.
So what was the issue in that case?
Basically, kind of what we've been talking about,
Okay.
that Gascon is not acting, and these are my words, not the good words of these appellate attorneys or whatnot, that Gascon is now acting as a legislator, and he has overstepped the boundaries of his job responsibilities and duties, and which is to be to uphold the law, not to create the law. So that's the argument that's going on right now. And he was, at the lower levels, he was enjoined from doing it. So they said you can't do that. So that issue's been making its way up.
He was stopped? Some court intervened?
Yes, and the appellate court intervened. And they enjoined him, and it's before the California Supreme Court right now.
Okay, so the DA Association case against Gascon is before the California Supreme Court.
Yes. And we're waiting to hear what they're going to say, because that could be a good thing, not a bad thing. It could, because if they come down on upholding the enjoyment, they said, hey, you can't do that anymore, that might lead into some things that I'm interested in. You know, I'm a tort attorney. I want to get clients some money or something, you get their damages addressed, and that may very well open that up to, hey, addressing immunity issues on the tort side, things like that. Because, I mean, if you really think about it, if a DA is able to do whatever the hell it is they want, what are the consequences? And if there's no consequences to like what Gascon has done, and by the way, hopefully I'm not getting ahead of myself here, but by the way, there's a direct line between the murders of these two good officers and what Gascon did. It's not in front of a jury. It would be an easy argument. He says, don't do this. Direct line, Flores is there, Flores kills him. If he being Gascon, if he said, hey, you know what? We're going to implement the 3 strikes. We're going to do it. Then guess what? Along that little line, boom, Flores is picked up. He's sent back to the big house, and he's not there to kill the officers. So there's a direct line there.
I'd love to argue that case in front of a jury.
I know, that'd be perfect. It'd be like, holy shit.
So I want to ask, okay, we're waiting on the California Supreme Court on the Deputy DA's Association case.
Yes.
I want to ask about the case that we brought and have you outline that for our audience. First, tell me about the implications of Michael Paredes' death. I mean, do you have family, kids?
Yeah, a little background. That's a very good question. And, you know, it's one of these moments when you go, hey, let's not forget that we're talking about a human being.
Exactly.
And that always has to be at the forefront of everything we're talking about. This is not a parking ticket. This is somebody's dad, somebody's husband, somebody's son, somebody's father who was murdered. He gave his life. And that should always be at the forefront of everything. How the case, you know, I got the first phone call. And I got the phone call from a friend of mine who is an El Monte police officer. This officer's father had been murdered by an inmate in Chino, about 15 years or so ago.
Okay.
And they were the family was looking to do something then, and nobody wanted to touch it because of all these immunities. When I say nobody wanted to touch it, what I mean by that is no attorney wanted to get involved for a lot of reasons. Primarily because there's no way to get any damages out of it.
There's no money.
There's no money. There's no money for the family. There's no resolution for the family. There's nothing. So I took it. I said, fuck it. Excuse my French. Let's fuck some shit up. We can edit that out later.
Well, Mark, I will say, that's one thing I've always admired about you, because I'm familiar with that Chino case you did years ago. We've talked about that a lot over the years, but I've always admired that about you, that you're willing to take these difficult, complicated cases that your garden variety lawyers don't take. It's too hard, it's too complicated, or more likely, it's just there's no easy money in it.
Exactly, but personally, it's there's bigger things going on than making money. There's bigger things going on, and everybody has their own style and the way they live life and things like that. I stick with my clients. I get to know them very, very well, and we become almost a family. And that's no BS. So that family, that son, he had just turned 21 when his dad was murdered. Okay, and then he went on to become an officer in El Monte. And so when his two friends, Santana and Paredes, were murdered, he called me. And I said, hell yeah, let's do this thing. And if nothing else, and I'm getting a little bit of goosebumps right now, if nothing else, let's give that family and that man, both of those guys, but that man, Mike Paredes, a voice to say, fuck off, to everything that fell apart that led to his death.
Because it should have never happened.
It should never have happened.
This wasn't just a question of bad luck or...
Nope, it's not an auto accident case, like oops. It should never have happened. It was a failure. I hate using the phrase perfect storm, but it kind of sort of was. And boom. So to give the family a voice and a presence, filed. You and I filed on it. And why do you do that? To give them a voice.
Yeah.
To fight back, to swing.
I was looking at pictures before in getting ready for our chit chat today. I was looking at pictures of Mike Paredes with his kids at Little League practice and whatnot, and man, that's a gut wrencher.
Yeah, you got kids. I got a kid,
Yeah.
and it's that's all you need to do is see those kinds of things. And if it doesn't tug on your heart, then you got to go do something else,
Yeah,
man.
you're a sociopath or something.
Yes. When I met Mike Perez's wife, she was working for a hotel, and I went to the hotel that she was working at and she was, and her daughter was there as well. At the time, the daughter was a minor. And they're devastated. They're shocked. You know, the 5 stages of grief and all that stuff. They were in shock. And, you know, I personally felt, you know, obligated to protect them and not just let the system suck them up and throw them out. Because the system gives them a little bit of money, and then this is adios. But the system doesn't take care of them.
And when you say the system, that'd be like the workers' compensation system.
Exactly.
Pays a death benefit.
Yeah, but it's, I mean, over time, I mean, you know, on that, you know, the workers' comp death benefit is a good thing. Yes.
100%.
Okay. And guess what? The kids have benefits, health benefits, and things like that. They would have had those things anyway, right? If Dad's state was alive, they would have had all those things anyway. So it's kind of a semi-replacement, but a dumbed down or a cheaper version of that. That's my cynical take on it. But they don't care about that. They want their dad back. Janine wants her husband back. That's what they want. Those pictures you're looking at, the football practice and all that stuff, they want that guy back. And so you go, how do you make it right? And when you sit there and you think about it, you go, okay, Gascon and all those knuckleheads over at the DA's office that implemented this, especially Gascon, because he did it up in San Francisco as well. When he does that, he's like, you need to be aware of your decisions, and there are ramifications to what you're doing. You need to take responsibility. So when we got involved, we filed, as you know, we filed the government tort claim to get the process going. And I went down to, when that process ran out, and by the way, just so everybody knows, you file a government tort claim, then it's denied, as it was here. And that supposedly gives the government, an opportunity to take responsibility.
What a joke that is.
They don't take responsibility.
Who were the defendants you named in the claim?
The DA's office, Gascon, numero uno.
Okay.
Gascon. I mean, he was, he's not a very well-respected and liked man, especially in law enforcement. Not at all. In public safety in general, not at all. That's number one. And number two, the whole DA's office. Number three, the probation department.
Okay.
Probation department falls underneath his reach as well. Now, the probation department, not a probation officer. I want to make that kind of clear because I represent we all represent probation officers for a wide variety of things. And it wasn't an officer failing individually. It was a system that failed. The probation system failed. And why? Because of what Gascon's, his directives. They basically made these departments, to me, not impotent, but semi-impotent. And they didn't, if they screwed up, who cares? What's the consequences? Nothing. They go, okay, so how do you address that? How do you deal with that? And part of it is like, okay, we're going to file a lawsuit. And we're going to take a hard swing. And guess what happens? Remember, when we file a lawsuit, we draw so much attention. Not just from the media, not just to getting on TV. When I did a press conference at the courthouse, there's a wall of cameras and stuff like that. And that's all very exciting stuff. But the reason it's important, it's not for me, by the way. It was for Janine. If you remember when she gave her speech,
I do.
To give her an opportunity to address the man, Gascon, and the system that failed her husband, and now she's a widow because of all this. And that's part of, to me, at least what we can do as lawyers, what we can provide a moment where they can have their voice heard. And Gascon, by the way, we did it right outside of Gascon's office. So Gascon's up there, and the hope is that it's touching somebody somewhere, somehow, somewhere. And it does. These are political figures. Gascon is a publicly elected official.
Yeah.
And you go, okay, so that's when politics kind of start coming in and stuff like that. But filing the lawsuit gives voice to the families. And also, by the way, now, pardon me for going on a little bit, it also gives a voice not just to the immediate family, it gives a voice to, guess who? the police officers at El Monte.
Yeah, the law enforcement family at large.
Statewide.
Yeah.
Statewide. When all of a sudden we filed,
Or nationwide.
Remember that? All of a sudden you're getting phone calls from everybody and their mother in the law enforcement safety world.
Yeah.
So what can we do? What can we do? What can we do? And the hard reality is there's not much that you can do except keep pushing. Because if you don't push, nothing's going to happen.
So did the government respond to the claim?
Yeah, they responded to the claim.
What'd they do?
Well, the initial is they rejected it.
Okay.
So that was not surprising. Okay. They always reject.
Which once they reject, that led us to actually file suit.
We file a lawsuit. So what do? This is when my cynicism just starts bubbling out. They go out and they hire, some of the biggest, baddest defense attorneys they could find. These are guys that I don't know how much they charge. They charge $1,000 an hour or something like that. Great attorneys, nothing wrong with these people individually or personally or anything like that. But they attack and they start attacking. And guess what? And they start attacking in kind of vulgar ways. They not only filed paperwork to get the case thrown out based on what's called immunities, and which we can get into in a second, and it's super frustrating, by the way, the immunities.
I want to ask you about those.
Yes, but they start attacking everybody. They start pushing back on, hey, how did it happen? Why were they there? And all of a sudden, the blame game starts going on. In such a vulgar way. And so you can tell what they do is they're playing it. And I invited Gascon to do what? Hey, why don't you come and have coffee or lunch or dinner or a meal with Janine and the family? And just, you know what? Nobody has to record anything.
Yeah.
Just say, look, I'm really sorry. Just explain it. I'm really sorry. This is what I was trying to do. This is what happened. I'm sorry. Nothing. Now, there might be legal reasons they don't do it, but it's extremely insulting, because there's no avenue for the family. There's no resolution. And by the way, it's not just the family, like I was saying. It's the law enforcement community, from the police chief in El Monte all the way down to the dispatchers. Not that they're down, right? But everybody. I was in contact with everybody, and they're devastated. They feel cheated. Like they feel like, hey, they gave us something. We jumped in the foxhole and we were firing away, like protecting the community. And then all of a sudden, something happens. And we're not being protected. Yeah. We're thrown under the bus.
How about the lovely Siesta Inn? Were they named as defendants as well?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yes, yes. So on that note, leading into that, one of the things that I'm a big proponent of is how do you push back? How do you make these entities accountable? How can you do that? You have to think outside the box. If you think inside the box, you ain't going nowhere. All those other attorneys I was talking about earlier who wouldn't pick it up, those are those guys. Yeah, it's too much risk. There's no money. Blah. You have to think outside the box. Okay. So our theory. Remember, Paul? Our theory was, hey, it's premises liability against that motel. I personally think it should be burned down and made into a park. You know what I mean?
A memorial, like
But yeah, we came up with the idea of, okay, there's premises liability. What that means is the owner and operator of that property knew or should have known that they were creating a dangerous
100%.
environment. And they were. And not only were they doing that, they were nurturing it. They were letting it continue. They were
profiting off the environment they created for the underbelly of society.
That's perfect. That's exactly what they were doing. They were profiting off of that. And that's profane and vulgar. Think about that. They're profiting off crime. That's basically what they were doing.
Because that was their clientele at the Siesta Inn.
Yes.
Drug dealers, gang members, hookers, whatever.
Exactly. And I drove in there, took a drive-by to see what it was all about. And I had an officer with me, and he was explaining to me, he goes, that room. What they do is the drug dealers in particular, or the pimps, they rent the room, or whatever they do, they lease it or whatever, and they set up shop in there. And they run their businesses out of there. And everybody knows it. It's not like it's some mystery. Everybody knows it. So guess what? that hotel or the motel, that motel is responsible. So that's why we got creative. They think outside the box.
So the property owner and the premises liability is always a potential target for us in cases
It
like
should be.
this.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, and I know in this case, this is the one silver lining is we did get their insurance.
Yes, they did have a good enough insurance policy, so we did get some compensation for the family. So yes, that is a very, very good thing. I would like to see that place shut down, but that's just maybe a higher calling for somebody else. It's disgusting.
Well, interestingly, there was a police shooting case in Sacramento County a few years ago, where a similar establishment. It was a Motel 6, though.
Okay.
Dirtbag Motel 6. There was an officer-involved shooting where the officer was killed. This was in the north part of Sacramento, and eventually the Motel 6 Corporation, what they did is they just razzed the whole building. Once the investigation was completed, they tore the whole place down.
You see, okay, go ahead. To me, that's the ethical and moral thing to do.
Yeah.
That's the thing to do. And I'm sure they compensated the officer's family and that sort of thing. And that's the thing to do. Yeah. By the way, that's socially the thing to do in your community. To me, that's what you should do.
Right.
You should be promoting safety for everybody and things like that. But guess what? They did that. This Siesta Inn is still there. It's still
doing business and probably still catering to the same clientele.
Yes.
Yes, so,
I would imagine.
So the good news is we succeeded in getting the insurance policy limits against the Siesta Inn.
Yes.
Okay, so that's a positive. What happened in the portion of the case, which was the big portion, the portion that we really want, against Gascon and the probation department?
Okay, they filed some paperwork called a demur, and what that does is that challenges the ability of the lawsuit to survive. So in other words, hey, is there any legal basis to go forward? And you have all the facts, bad players, murders, you have all the facts, but do you have the law? And the law as it currently stands right now says no, you don't. And
how so?
Yeah.
What part of the law?
Immunities. And what immunities are is, it's best to explain it like this. We inherited our legal system basically from the English, and you're not allowed to sue the king, right? So in America, you're not allowed to sue the king. We don't have kings, so the kings in our world are like, the governors, DAs, the public officials, things like that. You're not allowed to sue them, theoretically. If they do something, like if Gascon was driving down the street and hit you with his car, you could sue him, but he would be replaced by the county. So the county would pay you. So you can sue only in certain circumstances. If they are doing their official duty, and I put air quotes on that because I don't think he was doing his official duty here. I think he effed up. But it's a discretionary move. So his defense is, I am just doing the best I can. This is basically what it is, and it's a discretionary call. So my discretion led me to pull the 3 strikes. And there's immunities in place, government tort codes that prevents him from getting sued. When I say him, I don't just mean him personally. I mean him as a DA.
Yeah, district attorneys everywhere.
Yes. So these immunities are very, very frustrating because it does take the consequences out of the equation. And for me personally, I've been thinking about this quite a bit, especially with this case. So what's the consequences for Gascon? What is realistically the consequences? He just doesn't get reelected. And so is that really a consequence? Is that really a consequence to what he did and didn't do?
How ironclad are these immunities? In other words, what's their scope? What's their depth? Is he immune from any civil liability on all his decision making effectively?
For the most part, yes. Not everything. I mean, he can't say, okay, I'm going to kill everybody. So, he can't do something like that. But essentially, the answer to your question is yes. It's super frustrating. Now, by the way, how do you challenge those immunities? Okay. So
that was my question, Mark. How do you challenge those immunities?
You have to think outside the box. That's been my experience. You got to think outside the box. If you stay inside the lines, you're going to get screwed and you're going to go absolutely nowhere, period. So if you think outside the box, you go, okay, how do you do this? Number one, these are political figures. So politics have to come into play. You get police unions involved. You get special interest groups involved. And they begin to bug who? The knuckleheads who are supposed to be writing the laws. And the laws are the immunities. The immunities are the laws.
Our elected officials.
Our elected officials.
That you speak so kindly of.
Yeah, I wonder what they're doing right now. Do you think they're working right now?
It's lunchtime.
Exactly.
Early lunch.
So that is one approach. And by the way, I have found personally that when you do some kind of, I don't know if it's called PR marketing, but you put out press releases, you remind people in public offices that, hey, you're a public official, you got elected, and guess what? You're going to get bad press. You're going to get some pressure.
Sure.
Not just press in the public, because that's an elusive, world, but they can't. It is effective. By the way, Gascon doesn't want to see his name attached to the murder of 2 El Monte officers. He should. He should. And how do you put pressure on that? You file lawsuits. You put pressure on them, and then you educate officers throughout California. You make presentations. You do all these kinds of things, and then guess what? You encourage them to be more and more politically active.
So that's all with the objective of getting the legislature, the state assembly, the state senate, to make exceptions in these immunity rules.
Yes, change them. Yes.
Okay. In our case was thrown out of court.
It was.
Because
on that part, not against the motel.
Yeah, Siesta in that case survived.
Yeah.
But against Gascon, the DA's office, and the probation department, our case was thrown out. Technically, why?
Because of immunities. Okay. Because they're immune from prosecution. They're immune because of the decisions that they made, their discretionary in nature, and because of that, you can't sue them.
Could the decision of the California Supreme Court on the deputy DA's case against Gascon, that's before them at some point this year, could that change this at all?
I don't. That's a very good question, and I hesitate only because I want to read what their opinion would be. But potentially, it could begin a process where it can begin to change. Because what it would do, it would crack the door open to consequences. In other words, you can't just do that without any consequences. And by the way, DAs, stay in your lane. If you get out of your lane, what's the consequence?
Yeah, 100%.
And then all of a sudden that becomes subject to guys like you and I who get very aggressive, not only just suing like in the criminal world, but in the civil world. Like going, okay, you bastards, guess what? You got out, you did something you weren't supposed to do, you try to create your own law. Guess what? Here's the consequence.
You're going to be held liable.
Yes, and that's how the process begins. 30 years, I'll give you an example real quick. 30 years ago, 40 years ago, you wouldn't see police officers being charged with murders and stuff like that. All of a sudden it started to change because the public outcry started saying, hey, we have to hold officers accountable. The same could be true now for DAs and stuff. Why not? I got a phone call from an officer in South Bay area who wanted to sue the judge because the judge allowed somebody out on parole or something. And I said, you can't sue the judge. But you know what? I understand the vibe because that officer is like, what about us? Who's gonna? How do you get these people accountable? What about us? And that's a legitimate thing. And that's why I think that you have to think outside the box. You have to be aggressive. You have to be willing to shake hands with people you don't like. You have to be able to say things and do things that keep pushing the envelopes. Our system of laws is not a stagnant thing. It's an ever-evolving thing. It's supposed to reflect what the community wants in some degree. We want order. And if something's happening where there's no order, and the community should be able to influence by voting or something our great legislator and get them to do something. Because that's what it should do. And by the way, it takes bravery. Instead of being a coward, it takes bravery. Gascon right now hides behind these immunities. He knows. He's not stupid. He knows.
So I'm still trying to get my head around this immunity because what Gascon did specifically is he refused to prosecute strikes.
That's right.
That was one of many directives he laid down.
That's what's germane to this.
Okay,
yes.
So he refused to prosecute strike. And I could understand the immunity argument from an elected official saying, hey, I'm immune from liability on all the discretionary decisions I make because otherwise no one will do this job. There's a million discretionary decisions I have to make. Some are good, some are bad. I'm doing the best I can. I can't be held civilly liable for my decision making on discretionary decisions. But as I see the Gascon decision here, he just chose not to follow the law. It didn't look like there was any discretion. As I understand the three strikes law, they have to implement. Now, it's up to the judge how they do sentencing and so forth. But am I understanding that correctly?
You are, yes, you are. And that's what's before the Supreme Court right now. And you are correct. And so let's just assume, let's play out the facts a little bit. Let's just say the Supreme Court says, yeah, it's a big no-no. You can't do that. You're in the wrong lane. So implement all the three strikes. And you go, okay, so now that they're now doing it, but all this crap happened when you pulled it.
All this carnage has happened.
Yeah, that's a great word. All this carnage. So what do you do with the carnage? And then you go, okay, well, I want to sue the DA because of the carnage. That's when the immunities kick in. And that's what the frustrating part about it is. You're correct. I would agree with you because if you allow that issue before the Supreme Court, I'd be shocked actually if they allow that to stand. Because I'll tell you another thing to think about. It's different counties throughout California, and we have more counties than any other state in the union
or something.
This county down in San Diego, that one up in Shasta, and that one, they could all be different. It could all be different. So there's going to be some continuity that the Supreme Court's going to want with the California Constitution, all that kind of stuff. But if they force the three strikes, which they should, that resets everybody to stay in their lane. But the carnage issue, that's where I always go to. They're like, and I love that word because it's so applicable. Like, what are the consequences? I mean, for these guys, that you should be able to. I know this is going to sound high and mighty. They should be able to sue at least the DA's department for doing what they did.
For not following the law.
For not following the law.
I mean, I might get it. I might not agree with it, but I would at least understand the argument that they had a discretionary decision. They attempted to make the best discretionary decision they could. They made the best call on the information they had at the time, and okay, bad things happened. That's one thing, but it's a whole nother animal where there's a law out there that you politically, philosophically, whatever don't agree with as the elected district attorney, and you refuse to enforce it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's just well said. Yeah, I totally agree. It's insanity to me.
See, that seems to be the at least baseline situation where there has to be an exception in the immunity rule where we could, because I tell you what, I mean, you run an office, I run an office, we are potentially civilly liable for every decision we make.
Yes.
Right or wrong, right?
I have no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah, take the fifth there. But I'm telling you, it is in the words of the great philosopher Mike Tyson, if there's a consequence you're going to get punched in the face, you're going to think about your behavior.
Exactly.
And I sorry, Mike, I misquoted quoted you on that. But when there's no consequence, there's no careful thought about how you should act.
Yes, absolutely. I completely agree. It's a great quote.
For Justin Flores, there was no consequence. He's going to continue doing what he's doing as a gang member, as a drug user, as an addict, as an abuser.
Yes. Yeah. And I understand, by the way, the idea of like rehab. I understand that kind of stuff.
Sure.
But the reality is, I mean, there has to be a tighter system in place, and that was the three strikes law, by the way. And to have somebody come in and say, look, hey, I'm a DA, and then suddenly pretend like they're legislature, that's mixing, that's separation of powers. That's mixing it all up. And that is horrible. Yeah, I mean, ownership, own it. But there's the consequences thing.
Responsibility.
By the way, you talk about immunities and the legislature and all that kind of stuff. The idea, like, how do you actually really, really, really get something done? So here's an easy thought. Okay, so the immunities. So get the police unions together. Not just the police unions, but all unions together, all public safety unions together. And you go up to Sacramento, you knock on a few doors, and you say, look, we understand generally what these immunities are all about. Let's start carving what's called an exception to these immunities.
100%.
Why doesn't that happen? Why doesn't that happen? And it doesn't happen in a large part because it's not being communicated down to the community. So it's not, and it's nobody's doing that. To me, that's where the beginning starts. The resolution of this, the ownership. Like Jocko Willink says, own everything.
Yeah.
Own everything.
Oh, I love that.
And by the way, if you own everything, your world just is free. It's beautiful. They don't do that. The system is designed now to have no ownership, zero. So that's where, to me personally, that's an answer to how do you address it. Allow some wiggle room inside that immunity. And guess what? The legislator has the power to do that. The judiciary can do what? Affirm it. And then boom. Then you have a DA, if they make a fucked up decision, pardon my French, then guess what? If you have a carnage environment, then that family, especially like the Paredes,
Has recourse.
Exactly. Why is that so difficult? Why is that?
Well,
why is it so difficult?
I mean, that would have been interesting to see had there been a consequence for Mr. Gascon not to prosecute strikes. Had he known of a consequence, in other words, had he thought he might have got punched in the face, as Mike Tyson would say,
Exactly.
maybe he would have actually followed the law. And had he followed the law, Justin Flores would have been in prison, and the whole CSDN incident would have never even occurred.
Exactly. So that's a very good. By the way, that is a fantastic quote because without consequences, I mean, what does a guy like Gascon, what does he have to fear? He's just collecting a nice salary, is padding his pension, and he's got all kinds of benefits. He gets to go to French Laundry and eat his escargot with the governor.
Pursuing a political career.
Exactly.
That's what he's doing, really.
Exactly. So, why stop? And you go, there has to be consequences to these things. There really, and that's a failure in the system. By the way, I haven't lost all hope in that moment. I think that moment presents opportunity to fix it. Because if you do have elected officials, which should be an honor, by the way, to represent a community, if you hold them to be accountable.
Yeah, there's a novel idea.
Yeah, exactly. But if you hold them to be accountable, don't you, like you were saying, their job performance would be so much higher. You think about all the employees that you've had over the years, right? When you hold somebody accountable, their job performance is...
They kill it.
Yes, they kill it. And most people actually kind of want to hit that mark.
They respond to that.
Yes.
They respond to a structure.
They do.
And accountability.
They do. I think that's an opportunity that should still be on the table. I really do.
So, Mark, I can't tell you enough how much I appreciate this conversation. I think this is a really relevant issue. I think it's one that has to be addressed. We're almost out of time. Congratulations on fighting the good fight. Keep it up, please.
To you too.
For the benefit of all of us.
Yeah, we did this together. This was a one, not just for the money or anything like that, but it was a good fight. And
yeah, we want to keep it up, and we want to look for these opportunities. Where do you see this headed? Looking into the crystal ball. Where do you see this immunity rule headed in the future? Do you see it starting to evolve? That these ironclad immunities starting to erode? What do you see happening?
I do. Being a little bit outside the box kind of guy, I see. And I get phone calls now from officers. I just got one from somebody in the South Bay area. They were ambushed. She was ambushed and shot by somebody in an apartment complex. And you go, okay. So most people say, nah. When I say people, most attorneys don't think outside the box. They want to sue everybody and their mother. They're not thinking of the apartment complex. They're thinking of the administration. They're thinking of the DA, the judge. They're thinking of all those people. And what you got to do is you got to file claims against these people, hold them accountable, get them out in the public, because these are public officials. These are politicians. They're in their jobs because they're elected. So if you're putting pressure on them, they're going to respond. And guess what? That may or may not, but I'm hopeful that may lead to things like an exception to an immunity. That's how politics work. And unfortunately, it takes forever and a day to get things done now. But I do think that every single police officer, safety person throughout California, if they're ever involved in anything like this, not just deaths, but if somebody's injured, if somebody's attacked or something like that, especially if it's career ending, if you get retired out because of this, you need to think outside the box. Don't just assume that the system is going to take care of you. It's not 1952 anymore. The system's not going to take care of it. You have to be proactive.
Yeah, well, the system's designed to take care of itself.
Exactly. Exactly.
Self-perpetuating
I thought
bureaucracy.
I was the only one who was cynical.
No, it's a self-perpetuating bureaucracy. So if I'm hearing you correctly, really our job is to keep the pressure up.
Yes, absolutely.
And force that change, force that conversation one way or another, and try to give the survivors of these horrific events some voice and some hope.
Yes, and it's not shallow, it's not hollow hope, it's not. When you give something like, I'll use Janine as an example. When you and I have done this with Janine, when we were standing right next to her, and we step back, by the way, right? We let her talk. And when she's doing that's coming from the gut, man. That's coming from the soul, not just on her behalf, but her kids, her whole family, and the entire law enforcement community. If you do that, then you begin giving the voice back to law enforcement and first responders and that sort of thing. And that, by the way, I think, this is my cynicism, that's been taken away, especially since the last few years with all the defund the police and all that kind of crap. Sounds wonderful, I guess, to some people, but it's stupid and it doesn't work. No, it doesn't work.
Idiotic.
And guess what? This is a way to push back on that, not in a bad way, but in a very productive, honest, genuine way. Hey, my husband was murdered. This is how I'm feeling. That's important. And guess what? If we're able to keep pushing and keep pushing, and there's other legal angles, by the way. The legal angles don't just stop with, hey, let's do X, Y, and Z. Think outside the box. You got civil rights. It's extremely difficult to hit. The standards are extremely high. There's things like that if you're putting the government officials on notice, if you do X, Y will happen. And then if you do that, you're starting to put them on notice. And guess what? These politicians, not all of them, most, don't have a thing called a spine. So it's true.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, if they realize, holy shit, I'm being exposed, and my name is going to get attached.
They'll scramble.
They'll totally scramble. And guess what? You might get, what's that guy in the Bay Area, Burton? Or here in Sacramento, remember a long time? I don't know.
Yeah.
Some player.
A lawmaker,
some guy who's a mover and shaker. Boom. If you effectuate some change through somebody like that, that's how things can get done. Because again, law is not a stagnant thing.
One thing I've noticed is that if you can find a premises liability angle, one, that could be a very legitimate angle.
Absolutely.
But also that property owner is going to put pressure on the local and statewide government and law enforcement officials to help that property owner keep their property safe so they're not in a position of liability.
Yeah.
So I think it's one of a number of touch points that has to be considered.
You're absolutely right. The premises liability thing, by the way, you and I have talked about this quite a bit, is to me a wide open field.
Yeah, agreed.
Because, and that could be lucrative for the family. There could be resolution that way. So in all of these environments, one of the first things in the checkoff list is where did it happen, under what circumstances, that sort of thing. Because the focus typically is on the Flores, the dirt bags.
Yeah.
But if you look at the hotel or the motel or the apartment complex or the shopping center that has zero security, but 5,000 homeless guys living out there shooting up crack or whatever, then you go, okay, the premises owner has liability. And they won't like that. And guess what? They have to report to an insurance company, $1 billion corporation. Yeah. That's when you begin to motivate change. The $1 billion corporations, they're like, well, wait a minute. We're going to pay out?
Well, and that's who, let's face reality here. That's who these elected officials really work for anyway, right?
Exactly.
Whoever's donating money to their campaign.
Really? Obviously, yes, exactly. It's so frustrating.
Well, thank you, Mark. This has been awesome. I feel horrible for the Paredes family. We've worked with them now for almost a couple years. I hope they find some peace eventually. Keep up the good fight. Anything else you'd like to add before we wrap it up today?
Yeah, this was a joint effort, Bud. It was a tough fight, and it's not always easy, as you know, getting in the ring, knowing that they have. You have gloves on and they're bare-fisted, and they can use their feet, and so they have a lot of advantage on you. But you still get in the ring, and I did that, And it's not just you and I; it's our staff did that,
Yeah,
and
100%.
it's all the people around us that helped out. And I would encourage people to do stuff like that. And it was, you know, I feel as good as you can feel about something. I do feel good about the results that we got for the Paredes family. I really do.
Well, let's keep pressing away on this. Thank you, sir, very much.
Absolutely, yeah.
Appreciate this very much. Thank
Absolutely.
you.
Anytime.
Thank you, and join us again for another episode of Goyette Rano Thompson. You're going to be able to see this video on our website, on the Peacock and Bartlett website, and all the other media outlets where we are. Thank you very much.